The footage lasts less than 4 minutes. But in those 4 minutes, something happened that military planners on 3 continents are still trying to fully explain. You see the first vehicle stop, then the smoke, then the second, then the third, and by the time the 4th is burning, the soldiers who had been told those machines were untouchable are already running, not retreating in an organized fashion. Running, away from the machines that were supposed to protect them, away from the armor that had been described in briefing documents and press releases and defense contracts as the most survivable, the most advanced, the most protected ground combat vehicles that modern engineering had ever produced. And what you're about to hear is not the story that the news covered, it is the story underneath that story. The story of how a non-state organization with no Air Force, no Navy, and no satellite program managed to execute a military operation so precisely engineered, so carefully timed, and so brutally effective that it is now being studied in classified briefings in Washington, London, Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran simultaneously. Stay with me, because the last 5 minutes of this video contain something that almost nobody reporting on this conflict has connected yet. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let's start with what most people think they know about this engagement, and then let's take it apart. The basic facts are these. In the hills of southern Lebanon, Israeli armored forces were advancing through terrain that Hezbollah had been quietly preparing for months. What followed was a coordinated attack that destroyed or disabled 4 of the most advanced military vehicles in Israel's inventory: a Merkava Mark IV tank, a Namer armored personnel carrier, a D9 armored bulldozer, and a specialized armored engineering vehicle. 4 machines, 4 layers of Israeli military power, all hit in a single operation. And when the dust cleared, the images that spread across the internet were not just news, they were a signal, deliberately produced and deliberately broadcast, designed to be seen by every government on the planet that had a stake in knowing whether the most expensive armor money can buy is worth what it costs. Now, to understand why this matters so deeply, you need to understand what these vehicles actually are. Because the way they're sometimes described in casual news coverage as tanks and armored cars does not begin to capture what they represent. The Merkava Mark IV is not just a tank. It is the culmination of nearly 50 years of Israeli armor design philosophy built around one foundational idea that almost no other country's tank designers have prioritized to the same degree: keep the crew alive. In most tank designs, the engine lives at the back of the vehicle. In the Merkava, the engine sits at the front between the crew and whatever is coming at them. The entire internal geometry of the vehicle was engineered to give the people inside a better chance of surviving impacts that would kill the occupants of virtually any other armored vehicle in the world. Beyond that structural approach, the Merkava carries a system called Trophy. If you follow military technology at all, you have heard of Trophy because it represented a genuine revolution in the concept of armored vehicle protection. Trophy is an active protection system, which means it does not just absorb incoming fire, it kills incoming fire. Radar sensors scan the space around the vehicle continuously. When an incoming rocket or missile is detected, the system calculates its trajectory in fractions of a second and fires its own interceptor rounds to destroy the threat before it ever reaches the tank. Trophy had already proven itself in real combat. It had saved Israeli tank crews multiple times during operations in Gaza. Its performance had been so reliable and so impressive that the United States Army had decided to install it on its own Abrams tanks. This was not theoretical protection. This was a system with a verified combat record, and it was burning in southern Lebanon. The Namer armored personnel carrier sits alongside the Merkava in the upper tier of what military engineers call protected mobility. It was built on the same chassis as the Merkava, meaning the same basic architecture that made the tank so survivable was extended to the vehicle that carries infantry into and through combat zones. It weighs over 60 tons. To give you a sense of what that means, most civilian vehicles weigh somewhere between 1 and 3 tons. The Namer weighs over 60. That weight represents armor, and lots of it, along with its own version of active protection systems. It was designed to carry soldiers through environments where everything around them is trying to kill them, and to bring them out the other side. Military assessments had described it as among the most survivable armored personnel carriers ever built. It was burning in southern Lebanon. The D9 armored bulldozer is less glamorous than a tank, but arguably more important to how Israeli ground forces actually function in combat. It is a massive armored Caterpillar bulldozer, a piece of construction equipment that has been transformed into a frontline military tool by adding thick armor plating and ballistic glass so that its operator can function in direct combat conditions. It clears terrain. It removes obstacles. It demolishes structures that might conceal enemy fighters or weapons. When Israeli armor needs to move forward through defended terrain, the D9 is often the thing that makes that movement physically possible. Without it, columns stop. Without it, advances slow or halt entirely. Destroying a D9 does not just remove one vehicle. It removes a critical capability from the entire operation, and it was stopped in southern Lebanon. The engineering vehicle fills a similar function at the interface between ground forces and the terrain they're trying to cross. These are the machines that breach barriers, clear mines, create the physical conditions for armor to advance. They are not the weapons of choice for military propaganda because they lack the visual drama of a tank. But every experienced ground commander understands that without them, the most powerful tank in the world becomes a very expensive obstacle. And it was burning in southern Lebanon. 4 vehicles, 4 critical capabilities. And the way Hezbollah destroyed all 4 of them in a single operation is the heart of this story, because it was not a matter of luck, and it was not a matter of having a more powerful weapon. What Hezbollah deployed was something considerably more sophisticated and considerably more frightening than a bigger missile. What they deployed was a system, a thought-through, rehearsed, multi-layered tactical system specifically engineered to defeat the exact technology that made those vehicles so formidable. The system had 2 waves, and understanding those 2 waves is the key to understanding everything that followed. The first wave was not designed to destroy anything. I want to be very precise about that because it is the detail that most coverage of this engagement has either missed or glossed over. The first wave was designed to exhaust. Hezbollah launched a saturation of rockets, anti-tank missiles, and other munitions at the Israeli column, not in volumes large enough to overwhelm the column completely, but in volumes precisely calibrated to force the Trophy active protection systems on the Israeli vehicles to fire their interceptors. Trophy works by firing its own projectiles at incoming threats, but like any system that fires projectiles, it carries a finite supply. Every time Trophy engaged an incoming round in that first wave, it spent one of those interceptors. The first wave was engineered to drain the magazine, and the precision of that calibration is what separates this operation from a simple ambush. Too light, and the Trophy systems would have handled the threat with ammunition to spare. Too heavy, and Hezbollah would have committed their most capable weapons before the protection systems were depleted. They hit the window exactly, and when that first wave was done, the vehicles that had been so carefully engineered to be nearly indestructible were now exposed. Their active defenses were depleted or degraded. Their crews, who had buttoned up inside their vehicles in response to the incoming fire, had reduced situational awareness. The psychological conditions had been set, then came the second wave. This is when Hezbollah deployed what many analysts believe were Cornet anti-tank guided missiles, some of the most advanced weapons in that category, supplied through Iranian channels, equipped with tandem warheads specifically engineered to defeat reactive and active armor. The targets were vehicles whose Trophy systems had just been forced to spend themselves on the first wave. The results were what the footage showed, but here is what the footage did not show. It did not show the months of reconnaissance that preceded the attack. It did not show the specific terrain selection process through which Hezbollah had identified that particular stretch of ground as the location where Israeli armor would be most exposed and their own fighters most protected. It did not show the prepared firing positions, the tunnels, and hardened underground infrastructure that allowed fighters to appear, launch, and disappear before Israeli forces could respond effectively. It did not show the communication systems that had been specifically hardened against Israeli electronic warfare capabilities, allowing the coordination between the first wave and the second wave to happen with the precision of a rehearsed military operation, because that is exactly what it was. This was not an ambush born from desperation or improvisation. This was the product of a sustained analytical program that had been running for years, decades in some cases, in which Hezbollah had studied Israeli armor operations, cataloged the performance of active protection systems in previous engagements, consulted with Iranian military engineers who had been working specifically on countermeasures to Trophy-class systems, and developed a tactical doctrine tailored precisely to the terrain, the weather conditions, and the operational patterns of the Israeli forces they expected to face. The question that comes back again and again when you look at this is how? How does a non-state actor develop this level of sophistication? And the answer is time, patience, and a survival instinct so powerful that it drives a kind of institutional learning that well-funded conventional militaries rarely achieve, because well-funded conventional militaries rarely have to fight this way. Hezbollah has been watching Israeli armor operate in Lebanon since the 1980s. They were present for the 1982 invasion. They experienced the grinding occupation that followed. They fought through the 2006 war and emerged from that conflict with a different kind of education than most observers recognized. The 2006 war was widely analyzed as an Israeli military underperformance. What it was for Hezbollah was a graduate-level course in every gap in Israeli military doctrine that could be exploited with the right resources and the right tactics. They took meticulous notes, and then they spent the following 18 years filling in those gaps. They fought alongside Syrian government forces in the Syrian civil war. gaining operational experience at a scale that no non-state actor in the region had previously achieved. They received increasingly advanced weapons through Iranian supply chains, including precision-guided missiles, anti-ship capabilities, drone technology, and the anti-tank systems that featured in the southern Lebanon engagement. And throughout all of it, they kept doing what they had always done. They studied, they adapted, they asked what they would need to defeat the thing that was supposed to be undefeatable. The organization that exists today bears almost no resemblance to what Western media coverage typically describes when it reaches for the word militant or proxy or terrorist. Those words are not wrong in the strict definitional sense, but they create a mental image that is catastrophically inaccurate when it comes to military capability. Hezbollah today has a command structure, a logistics network, a training infrastructure, and a weapons inventory that would place it comfortably within the category of mid-sized national military forces if you judged it purely on capability rather than political status. This transformation has happened largely below the threshold of sustained Western public attention, in the shadow of Gaza and Ukraine and the South China Sea, and the dozen other crises competing for global focus at any given moment. And that inattention has consequences, because it means that when the footage from southern Lebanon circulated, most of the people watching it were seeing the outcome of a transformation they had never been told was happening. Now let's talk about what happened in the immediate aftermath of the engagement, because this is where the story becomes something more than a military analysis. Within hours of the attack, Hezbollah's media operation released footage of its own. Drone footage, ground-level documentation, carefully produced visual evidence of the burning vehicles and the surrounding terrain. And the audience for that footage was not primarily Lebanese civilians or Hezbollah supporters. The audience was governments. It was military planners in Tehran assessing the return on their investment in Hezbollah's capabilities. It was analysts in Ankara and Riyadh recalibrating their assessments of the regional military balance. It was planners in Moscow and Beijing updating their models of how advanced Western military systems perform against the kinds of countermeasures their own defense industries have been developing. It was defense contractors in Washington and Tel Aviv and across Europe being handed evidence that the systems they had sold and continued to sell as the dominant solutions to armored warfare had just been publicly and dramatically defeated by a non-state actor. This is where the burning vehicles stop being a military event and become something closer to a strategic communication. Hezbollah was not just trying to destroy 4 Israeli vehicles. They were producing a document, a proof of concept, an argument, broadcast globally and in real time, that expensive, sophisticated Western-supplied armor can be defeated with sufficient analytical preparation, the right combination of weapons, and a tactical doctrine built specifically around the vulnerabilities of active protection systems. That argument landed in every capital where governments are currently weighing whether to align with Western security frameworks or to pursue the kinds of asymmetric capabilities that the engagement demonstrated. The signal was calculated, and the calculation was based on something that military economists have been discussing quietly for years: the collapsing cost advantage of advanced armor relative to the cost of defeating it. A Merkava Mark IV tank represents somewhere between $3 and $4 million in manufactured value. The missiles used in a saturation attack to exhaust its active protection systems represent a fraction of that cost. The Cornet missile that delivers the killing blow in the second wave, even in its most advanced variants, costs tens of thousands of dollars, not millions. The economic logic of that equation is one of the most destabilizing developments in modern warfare, and it is one that the major defense establishments have been aware of for some time but have found structurally difficult to address because their entire procurement model is built around the assumption that technological sophistication is worth its price. What the southern Lebanon engagement demonstrated is that the price-to-defeat ratio has shifted in ways that advantage the attacker in asymmetric conflict scenarios. That shift is not temporary, and it is not limited to the Israeli-Hezbollah conflict. It is visible in Ukraine, where cheap drone swarms and inexpensive precision munitions have repeatedly disabled and destroyed expensive Western-supplied armor in ways that have forced every major military power to reconsider its armored warfare doctrine. It is visible in Yemen, where Houthi forces with a fraction of the resources of any conventional military power have disrupted global shipping lanes and demonstrated the reach of asymmetric strike capabilities. And it is now dramatically visible in Lebanon, where the most protected armored vehicles in the Israeli inventory were defeated not by a superior weapon, but by a superior system. A thought-through, patient, analytically rigorous system built around the specific vulnerabilities of a specific technology. The implications of this for global defense policy are already being felt, even if they are not yet being discussed publicly. The classified briefings happening right now in Washington and Jerusalem and across NATO are dense with analysis of what needs to change. Active protection systems need to be redesigned to handle saturation attacks more effectively. Tactical doctrine needs to evolve to reduce the exposure of armored columns in terrain where layered ambush operations are possible. Electronic warfare capabilities need to keep pace with the communication systems that allow coordinated multi-wave attacks to be executed with the timing precision that was demonstrated in southern Lebanon. These are solvable engineering and doctrinal problems. Defense establishments have solved similar problems before, but solving them takes time, and time is not a resource in unlimited supply when the strategic context is moving as quickly as it is in the Middle East right now. Because underneath the tactical analysis of how Trophy was defeated and what the second wave munitions were and how the terrain was selected, there is a deeper question that does not have a clean answer. The question is where this is going. Because the southern Lebanon engagement did not happen in isolation. It happened in the context of a regional conflict that has been escalating along multiple axes simultaneously since October of 2023. It happened in a context where Hezbollah's actions are coordinated within a broader strategic framework that includes Iranian strategic guidance, Houthi operations in Yemen, and militia activity in Iraq and Syria. It happened in a context where both sides have been making calculations about escalation thresholds that depend critically on reading the other side's intentions correctly. And it happened in a context where the deterrence architecture that has prevented a full-scale Israel-Lebanon war for the past 18 years is under more sustained pressure than at any point since 2006. Israel cannot allow the precedent of a successful attack of this sophistication to stand without response. The political and strategic pressure to respond in ways that re-establish the credibility of Israeli deterrence is immense, and is understood to be immense by every actor in the region. The responses have come through intensified airstrikes, through escalating exchange volumes across the border, through increasingly explicit public statements from Israeli military and political leadership about the potential for a larger operation in the north. But each response that climbs the escalation ladder invites a counter that climbs it further. And Hezbollah's calculation throughout this process has been that the current Israeli commitment in Gaza, the domestic political pressures within Israel, and the limits of American appetite for a two-front war in the Middle East create a window in which they can continue to escalate incrementally without crossing the threshold that would trigger the kind of overwhelming Israeli military response that neither Hezbollah nor Iran actually wants. That calculation may be correct. It may also be the kind of calculation that seems rational right up until the moment when a single miscalculation, a single misread of the other side's threshold, a single incident that escalates faster than either side intended, produces a situation that neither side can de-escalate without losing face in ways they cannot politically survive. This is how wars that nobody wants begin. Not through deliberate choices, but through a series of calculated risks that collectively produce an outcome that none of the calculators intended. The gap between those calculations and a full-scale conflict in Lebanon is narrower today than it has been at any point in the past 18 years, and the footage from those burning vehicles in the hills of southern Lebanon is part of what narrowed it. What the smoke rising from those four machines represented was the visual confirmation of a shift that had been building for years in the balance of military capability along one of the world's most consistently dangerous borders. It represented the culmination of decades of patient preparation by an organization that had decided its survival depended on being able to defeat exactly the technology that was supposed to make it impossible for them to survive. And it represented a moment of strategic communication broadcast globally to every government and every military that had been watching this conflict from what it believed was a safe analytical distance. The message was simple and it was received clearly. The gap is closing. The advantage is smaller than it was. The deterrence architecture that has rested on the assumption of Israeli military invulnerability has cracks. And those cracks were found not by a rival superpower with unlimited resources, but by an organization that simply studied harder, prepared longer, and built a system specifically designed for this moment. What comes next depends on calculations being made right now in rooms that will never be filmed, by people who understand exactly what those burning vehicles meant. The question is not whether they understood the signal. The question is what they do with it. And in a region this volatile, with stakes this high and actors on every side who have demonstrated willingness to escalate, the answer to that question will not stay theoretical for long.